IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm your host, Sridhar Krishna, and I'm talking to my colleague from Takshashila, Rijesh Panicker. Hi, Rijesh. How are you?
Good, Sridhar. Nice to be here, and I'm excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah, so Rijesh and I have been working on around AI governance, and I think that's been a topic of great interest, not only to us at Takshashila, but to folks all around the world. And so we're looking at it from a slightly different perspective than what many people are looking at least for today's conversation. We have been, Rijesh, I mean, you and I sort of heard that podcast, that interview between Rishi, Sunak and Elon Musk. A fascinating discussion, I thought, about 50 odd minutes bit on AI, tech, and the future, right? So they talked about that. And in that, I think many things that Elon Musk said sort of resonated with the way I've been thinking, and I wanted to get your perspective on this as well. One thing he said was, yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, so one thing I realized, he said was that AI has the potential to do a lot of good, right? I think one thing that all of us need to be cognizant of is AI's potential to do good. AI exists because it has great potential to do great good, and it doesn't exist in a vacuum in order to sort of destroy humanity. I think that's not the purpose for which it's been created. It's been created with the idea that it can do good. And I think many people are afraid about the harm that AI can do. And Elon Musk says, yeah, sure, it can do some harm, but it's important for us to be aware of what that harm could be cognizant of it, and ensure that we mitigate against it. But we shouldn't be so overwhelmed by it that we sort of try to ignore AI or just scuttle AI progress completely. I think that's something that I sort of took away from that, even though it was a sort of last thing that he said. He did mention very often during the course of the thing that yes, no, you shouldn't trust it completely. You should check various other things. You should really worry about something like this, what a humanoid robot can do, etc., and all those things. He did talk about things that you should be worried about, and I think it's true, we should be worried about them. But I think lots of people have talked about something to be worried about, right? But I think there's lots to be optimistic about. And especially in the subject of how can AI aid and enhance liberal democracy, rather than all of us being afraid that AI in the hands of a dictator can can lead to great harm and everything. So what are your thoughts on that, Rijesh? You want to sort of kick off the conversation around this?
So before we kick off on the liberal democracy piece, I also wanted to reiterate that the Musk interview was a really interesting one, because he's often portrayed as this naysayer when it comes to AI and all of that, right? That he's one of the doomsdayer folks who says AI is bad. And although he did repeat several times in the interview that we need to be careful, I actually thought he came across as quite an optimist. There were quite a few places where he, like for example, his take on AI in education as having an AI tutor that is there from you from childhood all the way through your life, and it becomes a personalized. That's a very interesting way to think about AI. And
yeah. Imagine that. I used to struggle to learn certain topics. When I was in college, engineering drawing was very, very hard for me. It was the easiest topic on which almost everybody got an A in our class, but I was somebody who struggled with it, right? Yeah. So maybe if I had a personal tutor, he could have taught me that, and I could have learned this way better. Yeah. Go ahead.
And if you take that idea into, imagine an AI, coming back to our topic about how AI might enhance liberal democracy, right? So think of it in three ways, right? You can think of I mean, first of all, every democracy is a complex system, right? It's basically an aggregation of different people's views and opinions on how their country should run, right? And that gets aggregated through a voting system eventually, and then you have politicians who respond to various pressures, and that's how it goes. It's a system of checks and balances. It's a very complex system, right? So it's interesting if you think about what AI might do when it's introduced in the middle of a complex system like that, right? So let's take the education piece itself. Now imagine that there is an AI that represents a particular politician's viewpoint. So he releases, say, digital chatbots of himself to which voters can communicate and respond, right? And they can have a conversation with his chatbot that represents his views 24/7 for 4 years, right? So the entire point about the politician only shows up at your doorstep once in 4 years for your vote is gone, because now he's available to 20. You can have a conversation, you can ask him, and the flip side to that can happen as well. Maybe the AI not just listens to you and responds to the voter, it summarizes and collates the concerns of a particular MP's constituency and feeds it back to the MP, saying, this is what your constituents are saying. Now, all of a sudden, you completely change that paradigm, right? The connection of a voter and the politician is completely changed simply because there's an AI in the middle, right?
Yeah.
So that's one way to think about
that's
it.
Quite fascinating, right? So I think, instead of once in 4 years, you're connected with your politician continuously. You tell the politician what you think, and the politician has the means to. I mean, today you could say that it's possible. Why don't we just send an email to our politician, and that way the politician could know that this is what the constituents are thinking. But a chatbot is different in the sense that it might be in a position to answer some basic questions which are about fact,
or explain the position of a given politician in a way better way than an email can or some document.
Correct. And the second thing that a chatbot can do is also to distill all this information, summarize them, pass it on to the a politician, get the politician to actually respond to it, and and communicate that to everybody, right? And I think it forces the politician to be responsive. And if you have politicians who are responsive to citizens, so that's a good thing. That's +1 for democracy, right? Yeah.
Yep. See, another way to think about it is, let's say increasingly you're seeing the use of social media for political campaigns, right? Obviously, but imagine if you had an AI, and this is just a thought. I don't know how feasible this is, but let's just imagine out that I am a independent candidate who does not have the money to compete with large political parties on the ground. What if I could use an AI to better represent myself, right? The AI is like my political strategist. It helps me create campaigns. It helps me raise money through crowdfunding. It helps me reach more people than I could otherwise reach. Could that help smaller parties or smaller candidates compete better with large parties?
Sure. I mean, and in fact, the more campaigning goes online, and the more it becomes like this, the chances are that the cost of running a campaign could come down dramatically, right? So when the cost of running a campaign comes down dramatically, then it could create a level playing field for many people. With all the information that's available today, the research that large political parties are capable of doing, if today it becomes accessible even to smaller parties and to sort of individuals, that makes it possible for many more of us to be participating in democracy. I think so that's a very, very critical thing. I think not participating in democracy is saying that, Plato had a very interesting thing to say about this. Plato said that, the price of not participating in public life is that you're doomed to be ruled by your inferiors. Right. So only those who are willing to, because you think you're too good for it, and this is a very dirty place, we can't participate, then we are going to be ruled by people who don't think it's dirty and who are able to do so. So it's important for many of us to participate. And I think if money is a deterrent, ability to raise money, the cost of participating in elections are high, I think from that perspective, it can definitely help in doing this differently. But tell me this, Rijesh, I think you had while we were talking before the recording, you talked about having a little framework to sort of think of how AI has two roles, you said, right? So what did you say? You said one where AI is a decision maker, and another way AI is a teacher or coach, etc. And you had some
Yeah.
categories. Do you want to sort of explain how AI can help develop democracy through your framework?
Yeah, sure. So the framework is basically like, it's a normal matrix, right? So on the one side, on let's say the y-axis, you have AI as a teacher or an explainer of concepts to someone versus AI as a decision maker. And on the other hand, you have three or four ways in which you might be able to impact a democracy. So that one is discussion in the public sphere, which is social communication, political campaigns, misinformation, all of those things, right? The second is the actual conduct of elections, and how might that be impacted by AI. The third is the delivery of, let's say, government services is a way in which it can impact democracy, right? So, all three of these areas, you could think of AI as assisting or supplementing by explaining what's happening, or AI
Mm-hmm.
as a decision maker. So, very simple example. There is this app called iSide in Britain. It's basically it's like an election matching app almost, right? I believe it's been used some 5 million times by people. What
Mm-hmm.
that app does is, if you give it your preferences, it will actually tell you which political party to vote for,
Ah,
which is scary because there the app has made a decision for you. You don't actually know on what basis the decision was made. And if you choose to go with its preferences, then you've given up. You effectively, the app has voted. You have not voted, right? So that is an AI as a decision maker. Whereas an app that says that you ask it a question saying, okay, what is this party's position on a given issue, say unemployment or growth or distribution of income, whatever it is, any topic, and
yeah,
the AI explains to you that this is what this party's position is, this is their stated position, these are the policies, and then you question it about what does the policy mean, what is it actually meant in practice. If you're able to have a discussion, it's almost like having a discussion with an expert, except the
yeah.
expert is an AI, right?
And you
And
could
so
also have this
that allows.
AI. Yeah, it could also tell you that, like, hey, I mean, this is what the politician is saying, but this is what they're actually doing. I mean, it can give
Correct.
you that transparency. The gap between the saying and doing can also be sort of caught out. Right?
And
Yeah.
that's very important because like we were just speaking a while back about capital being very important, right? The one of the reasons why I think participation goes down in democracies is also because things are more and more complex. It's very difficult to understand an issue, right? If somebody says that you're passing a policy for XYZ reasons, then it is very difficult to sort of reason and say these were the reasons for which a particular policy was done, and these were the outcomes and effects. Can we causally connect those two things, or can we understand what were the outcomes and were they the right outcomes? It's very difficult for most people to spend the time to understand that. And that
Yeah.
that is exactly why we have think tanks like us, like Takshashila, right, to
Yeah.
solve that problem partly,
Correct.
and
And I
that
think
might be
when you
resolved or eased out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can imagine like very sophisticated simulations being done on a complex system like this, which can help. Today, what do we do? I mean, when we write a policy document or when we simulate write an exercise for writing a policy document, one of the things that we look at is, okay, here's the intended outcome. Here are the different policy options. And here's how you would sort of compare the outcomes of each of these policy outcomes. But at the same time, there are also unintended consequences of each of these policies. You decide to do something. I mean, you decide, like, you want to protect your local industry. Therefore, you go out and increase your import duty on a particular good. So you want imports to become more expensive, your domestic industry to be protected. Then the downside of that could be your domestic industry becomes less competitive. Over time, it becomes incapable of, like, becoming a globally competitive outfit. The people in the downstream industries end up with substandard goods, therefore, or more expensive goods, and therefore are unable to compete themselves, and so on. So these are unintended consequences. The original intention was just to protect that domestic industry in a particular area. So I think AI will help us to simulate and be able to tell you that there's all this that's possible. These are the unintended consequences which might happen as a result of this policy, and therefore offer you a good suggestion as either as a politician or as a supporter to figure out whether you are okay with this or not. Yeah.
To both, right? I mean, that's the interesting thing about an AI. It's never going to be one-sided. As much as the AI is able to explain to you something in some way, it equally allows the politician to then craft and change their messages so that that it will be adaptive. The politician will adapt when AI becomes common and they understand that people understand what's happening better. They will change their messaging, and once again there will be other ways to create misinformation. So that's never going to change. That battle against misinformation and all the things that we see today, that is never going to change, right? It's just that the tools will be different and the playground will be different.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
Yeah, and I think we're all going to be better informed citizens. I think one of the things that you talked about was also we now know we're better informed about the policies that exist. We know what services are available to us, what we're entitled to as citizens, what you can demand, what you can request, what you can ask for, and so on. And also there could be greater transparency made available to everybody, because very often the reason people give you for not sharing information with you is that it's hard to share information with you, or it's expensive to collect all the information that you require, or that you would be violating somebody's privacy by sharing this and so on. And I think AI gives you options to circumvent many of that and say hey, this is all it costs. This is what has been done. This is what's been achieved. This is not been achieved. This is what the politician made a promise. These are the promises which were made by this person during the course of all their election speeches, and what was actually delivered compared to all of that. I mean, you can just you can hold people more accountable.
But at the same time, right? True. But at the same time, we should be aware of the flip side to that problem, which is that the more AI gets into those spaces, the more the chances that, one is obviously, you want the AI to explain it, but it is entirely possible for AIs to start off as explanatory programs, but then end up as decision-making programs. So I'll give you an example I thought up. It's a hypothetical example, but let's say that you have an AI that's able to explain to you how a particular law works, right? It's not too far-fetched to imagine that it can also explain to you the loopholes in a given law. So now you have an AI that tells you how to find loopholes in a law, and that becomes a problem for lawmakers, because you start to imagine that as AIs get smarter and smarter, it becomes easier and easier for them to find the loopholes. So an obvious solution that is obviously you should have an AI that is adversarial to the loophole finding AI. And now you have a situation where you have two AIs, one is finding a loophole and one is trying to plug loopholes. And you could end up in a situation where the law changes so fast that it's no longer possible for a human to keep up and understand what the actual law is at a point of time. I mean, it's
that's one way of looking at it, Rijesh.
If you're not careful.
Sure, Rijesh, but I think the way it might truly happen, I think what you said is a very interesting one. But you have these adversarial networks, which was what your GANs were also, right? Generative adversarial networks, where you came up with ideas and then you sort of proposed them. The idea behind this also would be, even when you're forming a law, they would use AI. The policy makers would use AI to confirm whether there are loopholes in the law and whether these loopholes should be plugged or not to be left open, and whether it's worthwhile sort of plugging them, or is it better to sort of leave them open. And it'll go through the whole process and give you cost benefit analysis, and then decide what's the best way to best law which meets the objectives of the policymaker, and with the minimal collateral damage and unintended consequences, right? So I think I look at it as a positive from that perspective, rather than something which will make it worse. So Francis,
it is a positive, but it's just I'm just saying it's Sorry, go ahead. That's fine.
No, you complete your thought. Yeah, it is a positive, but
no, I was just saying it is a positive, but it's kind of tricky because it's a slightly slippery slope, right? It is very easy to get sort of carried away by pressure into saying that, you need to fix this problem quickly, and AIs are far better than fixing it, and then giving up control way too easily. Like I was saying with the election app, right? You can feed in your preferences and an AI will tell you which party to or which candidate to vote for. That is so convenient that you don't realize that you've given away a freedom, basically. Right?
Yeah.
And that is always a risk with AI, that the convenience sometimes just makes us blind to what it is we are actually giving up for the convenience.
That is so true. And I think that's that very important point. I mean, very often we just go in and we are asked to sign consent to to our data being used in one way or the other. And there's just the convenience of the platforms that we use is so much, and the allure of the platform is so high that we sort of tend to blindly just go down to the bottom, click agree, and move on, right? And we might be giving away a lot, and it's very important to not do so. And with AI, it's going to become more and more important that we don't do that. So yeah, I think that's important. And I was talking about this Francis Fukuyama at that point, and I said like he was a big believer in liberal democracy, right? And he believes that it's the ultimate form of government. He's a highly respected Stanford professor, and he was asked the same question. I mean, do you think AI will help or hinder liberal democracy? And he said, like, you know what? I would have thought that with all this, I mean, the same question was asked around when the internet came along. And he said, I thought like all this would be wonderful and there would be greater transparency. And therefore, it would be good for people. People will be better informed. And he said that, yes, it's true that people are being better informed with AI. But on the other hand, he said, like, you know, there are lots of snooping that goes on, the technology which is developed, the hands of, like, you know, a more authoritarian government, things can become more difficult for a common citizen, and loss of privacy and so on are threats that he says we need to find ways to mitigate against. However, I think the biggest benefit of all this, in my opinion, is this whole idea of greater efficiency in delivery of services. If AI, I mean, Musk had this, I mean, coming back to our favorite interview, right, I think like between Musk and Rishi Sunak, where Musk says that, Rishi asked Musk whether what will happen to jobs with AI. And Musk's answer was that maybe there will be a time when there will be no need for anyone to work. We'll be living in a world of abundance. There will be, it will be utopian, or what did he say? Protopian. He said protopian. And he said that nobody would probably need to work. And there would be so much. So efficiencies could be so much that like there'll be all goods and services will be easily available to everyone. So I think that's a very interesting one. What are your thoughts around that? How do you think that sort of works towards eliminating global hunger and so on? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, see, so to that specific point, I think it's a very utopian idea. The idea that, you'll have, as he said, you'll have universal high income instead of universal basic income. And nobody will need to work. You might want to take a work or take a job on for satisfaction or for other needs, but you don't need it to survive, right? That's a very interesting idea. It's almost a Star Trek kind of a scenario, right? Where basically humankind is just fulfilling their higher needs, right, on Maslow's hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
All of your lower needs are fulfilled. It's interesting. I mean, I would love to see how we can get there. But I do feel like, but I think the subtler point that he said was the big problem then for mankind is how do you find meaning in your life? And that is a big issue because for the last century, 2 centuries, we've defined work as where we find meaning, right? So now if you're going to go away from that, that's going to be a very interesting and a very long, I think, journey for us to move away from this idea that work is everything to.
Yeah, I think like work was required. Let's just go back in history, right? I mean, like, you know, for people to survive, just to survive every single day, you had to go out and hunt. You had to go out and, like, you know, take great risk in order to, like, hunt, get your meat and eat, right? Otherwise, if you didn't, you die. Or you could, like, you know, die while you're trying to hunt. It was extremely perilous way of life. It's and from there we've come through to a point where there's so much more security. Most of us don't wake up every morning thinking that we're going to be killed, right? And I think so there is progress. So it's not like, you know, as far-fetched as we might believe it. I mean, like, you know, maybe 10,000 years ago, if somebody had said that you don't have to go out and hunt every day and risk your life in order to eat, but you just be sitting at home and there'll be like food delivered at home. I mean, that's like, it would have been quite crazy, right? So, but I do think that it's possible that I mean, you look at agriculture, so much of our world's population was spending its time on just growing food or like rearing livestock and so on in order that we survive. But today, most of the global GDP is not around agriculture or any of those things, but for providing services around many other things that we would not necessarily consider as essential services, right? At least 60-70% of all the services and of the world's GDP is towards activities which one wouldn't consider as essential services. So from that perspective, I don't think it's impossible to imagine. And I look forward to a world which is so utopian. I think like it's wonderful, the idea of it.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, another point that he mentioned, which I also agree with, is that increasingly in the world we are facing problems that are beyond a single country, like climate change or whether it's food scarcity, whatever it might be. Some of these problems can't really be solved by a single nation, right? You need everybody to work together, and who knows, maybe AIs are an interesting alternative to let multiple countries arrive at the same page on how to solve a problem, right? So something like climate change may not really be solvable if it's just humans with their biases and their emotions and their feelings toward their own country try to solve. Maybe it's not really easily solvable, but maybe an AI can help come up with paths that are acceptable to everyone because the emotion is out of the picture there. Who knows, right? But
that sounds like a fantastic thing. It's an absolutely interesting thought. And I think I was looking at that list of 10 ways AI will change democracy by the Harvard Kennedy School. And one of the things that they're talking about is AI as a mediator, moderator, consensus builder. I think this is something that I think could be a fantastic use of AI, right? And I look forward to that. I think that's very good. Yeah. Great.
In fact, it might also be a very interesting future way in which policy think tanks ought to be working. That policy think tanks should not be writing papers. They should be building AIs that act as consensus builders for their particular policy thought process, right? Yes.
Yeah. On this very happy note, I think AI has, I think, if I were to sum up, I would say AI has challenges. There are very legitimate fears of how AI could be misused in the wrong hands and threaten liberal democracy. And in the hands of a dictator, it could be quite scary and brutal. But with the right safeguards and the guardrails, I think there are potential of AI to actually benefit and support liberal democracy, I think seems to be really good. And one should work towards taking advantage of that. That's how I would look at it.
Absolutely.
So what do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think, look, it's open-ended, right? We still don't know where AI is going. I mean, and by the way, all of this discussion that we've had, we are not even talking about superhuman intelligence AIs or artificial general intelligence. We're just talking about the proliferation of the kinds of AIs that we see today, right? So so it's very open-ended. We don't know where AI is going to go, but it's not as though it's all bad. There are risks, obviously. Yeah, it's not all doom and gloom. There will be many ways in which AI is positive and will contribute positively, even to democracy. So let's hope that we can stumble our way into that future.
Oh, thank you very much. That was brilliant. Thanks, Rijesh. Nice talking to you on this.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.